Hello, my name is Peter Brewer, and I'm a partner in the dispute resolution team here at HCR Law. And today we're going to be talking about family businesses and how you can manage disputes and some of the tensions and some of the unique situations you might face when you are dealing with businesses that are owned by one family. My little sort of secret here is that whilst I've always worked in law firms for the entirety of my career, I actually come from a family business background myself, because my own parents owned a family business that had been set up, in fact, by my great grandfather in the 1930s. But I have someone here who's much more embedded into family businesses than I am, George Bryan. George, do you want to say a bit about your background and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I am a family business advisor. I'm also a interpersonal mediator and a student psychotherapist. So just about to finish that. So fingers crossed. My background is like yours, family businesses. So my family business was Drayton Manor theme park. My grandfather set it up grandfather and grandmother set it up in 1949, and the family owned it until October 2020, when unfortunately it went into administration.
George, in terms of sort of what you're doing now and the kind of clients you're acting for, what kind of situations do you see where there's tension? Is it tension between different generations in the same business?
That is, yeah, pretty much. So one of the most tensions that I've seen, and you read about and you talk about, is that succession tension. So you've got, let's say, first gen deciding that who's going to take on this business, whether it's the second gen, or even could bypass second gen, go to third gen. You never know. It depends who's suitable, and then that creates sometimes infighting in between that generation as well, because they all want to vie for that sort of top spot, so to speak. And also then there's that, when that finally starts to happen, then there's the glue normally, because there's normally a patriarch, and that glue starts to break, and then there can be more infighting in the generations. But that's not always the case, but that,
Do you sometimes see in the businesses that you advise then a sense of entitlement between, so generation one aren't going to be entitled because they've set the business up, but generation two and possibly generation three might be, because they have the same surname as the founder. Do they expect sometimes to be put into certain roles, even if they're not necessarily capable of doing them?
uh, yeah, I think so. I think so. And I don't think that's a sort of a, when entitlement's a very, I don't know, tricky word sometimes. For me, it evokes lots of different types of feelings and things. But yeah, if it's a family business that's going through first and second and to third, maybe fourth generation, then yes, there is a sense of entitlement, because you want to follow on that family tradition. Not necessarily it's a sense of entitlement. There's something else driving that, not entitlement as what I would say entitlement is, or other people might think entitlement is.
Yeah,
Do you get that difference?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, is it sensible then sometimes to look at a family business and say, actually, the next generation perhaps aren't fit for purpose, and therefore we should try and have a separation between ownership and management. We should therefore professionalize our management and recruit people in to do that role.
Yeah, no, that happens all the time, all the time. But then what's the measurement for saying that your children or nephews or cousins, depends how the business is set up, aren't suitable?
Yeah.
Because, you're looking at it from, let's say, a father's point of view, or an uncle's point of view, or a grandfather's point of view. How do you know your children aren't? Just because they're working in the business and doing the day-to-day doesn't mean they're not capable. Have they even been asked the question as well? That's another thing, is, has that conversation happened? Right, we're going to start looking at this, and this. What do you bring to the table, so to speak? Then you start to look about, have they got outside experience, or is it just all in the business? And then and if they haven't got any outside experience, then maybe you could put something in place where they go and get outside experience.
Is it a good idea then to send Gen 2 and Gen 3 off to go and get jobs elsewhere before they come back to the family business? I know that's quite common in very large are quite high profile family businesses
Yeah.
where Gen 2 might go off and get a professional job, in professional services for a while, and then will come back to the family business, perhaps in their late 30s, early 40s, and then take a director role then. Is it a good idea to get that external experience, do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think it's always good to get that experience. But is it suitable? Let's say the majority of family businesses are small, owner managed family businesses. So can you afford to lose your children for 2, 3, 5, 8 years while they're out getting experience? And then what happens if they don't come back? Then you've got another problem, haven't you? That you all of a sudden, this family business, this legacy that maybe you want to pass on, doesn't have any successors.
Yeah.
So there is that. You show them a different side, and maybe they choose that side rather than the family business side.
So how then do you manage the reluctant Gen 2? So something that I've spoken about in the context of family business previously, I think it gives a really, really good set of examples in relation to the dynamics in a family business, is the film The House of Gucci, which of course is about the operation of the Gucci business up to the mid 80s, when I think eventually it was acquired by a private equity fund. In that film, Maurizio Gucci, who is the son of the brother the grandson of the founder, and the son of one of the Gen 2 who weren't actively involved in the business, but Maurizio Gucci's kind of pushed into his leadership role.
Yeah.
Reluctantly, funnily enough, actually, Maurizio Gucci's background is a corporate lawyer, and he wants to be a lawyer for the whole of his career. How then do you select the person to put into that role, and deal with them if actually they're reluctant to do it? They're just simply there because of who they are.
It's a very difficult question, that is, because if somebody's not reluctant to do it, then why are you focusing on that person?
Yeah.
If they're reluctant to do it, and if they're being open about being reluctant to do it, there's a lot of reluctance in there. But why don't you get outside management to run it? But then family businesses getting outside management, it's always that's another difficult situation. But they obviously saw something in Maurizio Gucci. They obviously saw something in, because he had that lawyer background, that outside experience, and maybe they thought he was the best to run the family business.
I think another interesting thing in the film, of course, is that there's a great deal of pressure simply because his surname is Gucci, and therefore there's an expectation within the family that he will not only an expectation that he'll be involved, but actually be happy to do so. And of course, it's a slightly different example to perhaps a small engineering business in the West Midlands, because Gucci had an international name by the time that Maurizio was involved in it, and there was clearly a lot of profile that came with that. But as I say, the interesting thing in the film is how much pressure he's under to get involved in the family business, regardless of what his own ambitions and desires are. And that must be a real sort of point of tension, I think, because the thing is that when you force someone to do something they're reluctant to do necessarily, it can be a trigger for disputes, and those disputes can then escalate. Which, of course, as we know, having watched the film,
yes,
it's very apparent in that film.
Yeah, was he? Can you remember? Because I don't remember whether he was, because he was a Gucci member. Was he paid still by the family as well, or was he, because some families, because of the name and whatever, you still get paid by a trust or whatever?
Do you know? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
it's an interesting question. I think he was paid as an executive of the business,
not just because he's Gucci.
Of course, another great example that comes from the film The House of Gucci, not least of all because it results in a shareholder dispute, which is something I specialise in dealing with, is Maurizio's cousin. Now, Maurizio's cousin, who is the son of the active Generation 2 director, but unfortunately is certainly portrayed in the film as not being particularly competent.
Yeah.
Dealing with the incompetent Generation 2 or Generation 3 person, perhaps someone who doesn't recognise where their skills lie, that must be a real challenge. Do you do that by trying to persuade them that actually it'd be best to professionalise their management and get external people in to to support them, and to try and do that in a subtle way where you're not highlighting their own weaknesses.
Well, that would be the best solution. If there are, I'm going to say, skills gaps. It's the best way to put it. Skills
Yeah.
gaps is all depends on also what the business objective is. Because if the business objective is I want to carry it on, I want it to you go to third, fourth, fifth gen, which is very unusual, by the way. Then yes, it could be a total sort of not split the company as in like shareholders, but literally we have an operating team now that are going to run the business, and the family are going to continue hold their shares, hold their interest, have one member maybe of a family council. Let's say set up a family council which sits at the side, and then the lead of the family council sits also on the operating board,
Right.
and then communicates the wishes of the family, of the direction of the business, all that sort of stuff. So there's a clear separation from the family, from the operating business.
You would need, wouldn't you, to have quite clear rules in relation to what's referred to the family board, because you would want to try and avoid a situation where the family board or the family members were constantly interfering in the executive function of the
Yes.
company, because that wouldn't be helpful for the company
Well,
necessarily.
yeah, and that's why you have a clear separation, and that takes time, because it takes time for people to understand. Because if they've been working in the business, they want to still want to add value, and so if you separate it, they're going to feel obviously sort of, I don't know, maybe a little bit lost, a bit of ostracized. But if the business is going well, they can still get, because if they're still shareholders, they still get dividends and all that sort of stuff, so they can pursue their own thing, but also managing the interest of, but not physically managing their interest of their family business as well.
I mean, we'll talk about managing disputes in a minute, because obviously that's very relevant to my practice as a solicitor. But you touch on an interesting point there, I think, which is setting up structures to try and avoid disputes. Sadly, disputes sometimes are inevitable. And the reality is that whilst people like me try and do our very best to get to a sensible solution for the clients we're acting for, disputes destroy relationships. And they also potentially destroy value as well. And so it is sensible to avoid them. So actually, if you constitute a family business in a way where you have, for example, a family board and then an operating board, and the articles or perhaps shareholders agreements then define exactly what the functions are between those organizations, that could be quite an effective way, couldn't it?
Yes.
Of trying to make sure that the business runs professionally, because of course for the family that's in their interest, because if the business does well and they are the equity holders,
And
that's equity, exactly. They're able to draw a bigger dividend and their shares increase in value.
Even family constitution as well, so you could add all those in.
So what does a family constitution look like then?
Well, it's a bit of family constitution could be a bit of a jigsaw, so you can add bits in over time, so you don't have to, some from my experience, some advisors come in and they say, we want to put a family constitution in, and it's like, well, hang on a minute, why do you want to go straight for that? Let's put one piece in. Let's say, because what we started to do in our family business is I put in a family employment policy. So that was not to restrict family at all from coming within the business. But if you look down the tier, so you had first gen, and then you had second gen, which was 3 people, 3 family members, and then the third gen, which I was there was myself, my brother, my 2 cousins, and 2 other cousins that weren't in the family business. So that was 4. So that was 6,
Right.
let's say. So only 4 within the family business. And then you go down to Gen 4, right? And there's 10 great grandchildren
Of the founder.
of the founder.
Yeah.
And the other 2 members that weren't working in the family business hadn't had any children yet. So that's 10 people that all of a sudden could go, well, I want to follow daddy or mommy's footsteps and work in the family business. And all of a sudden you've got 10 other children, adults to manage. Where do they fit in the business? Is there space for them to fit in the business? So, we started to put in a family employment policy where it actually set out, yes, you can work in the family business, you work sort of when we needed most employment, which was like seasonal
Yeah.
to start off with. And then we had like a sort of a training schedule. So you would spend a month in finance, you spend a month in operations, spend a
Right.
month in, you know, so you get to learn all aspects of the business, because it took, you know, third generation, we were in the business. We heard about everything from our parents and uncles and grandfather and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of, I don't know how you call it, sort of osmosis of communication
Of course, your grandfather was involved in the business until quite late in his life, wasn't he? I mean,
yeah,
he took an active role for
yeah,
a very, very long time.
yeah, he was about 88 when he actually physically stopped not he physically retired.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, he would come into the park and he had this battered old Citroen AX or something anyway. And he used to basically come into the park and he'd have his dogs in the back and he'd open the door and he'd drive around and the dogs would follow him around and then you'd go out. And that was the sort of how he, you know, the sort of the retirement sort of ended, where he was like, I'm going to stop, because he was 88. It's a good age. And he's sort of, you know, he was just getting old. And but it was great. You know, the dogs used to chase people and all sorts. I've got loads of stories like that. So it's, but yeah, the family employment policy. And so if, and this is where the mechanism was, what we were talking about earlier. So if somebody didn't want to go into the business, or they did the sort of the 12 months in you know, finance and did all the aspects of the park, and then decided, actually it's not for me, I want to go and I want to go to university or that. So the company was then used as a vehicle to help pay for that as well. So if they and it was a very interesting conversation actually with my brother and my cousin, and when we're talking about, well, what does it mean paying for university? And it was like, well, we will pay for your university and your upkeep if you go and do finance or MBA or whatever, not flower arranging, I think was the term. So it had to be.
You had no florists in the park.
No, we had no florists in the park, but it had to be something that the business could utilize. So you could bring a skill to the business and have an understanding, not flower arranging. I mean, that was, yeah, that was the funny bit.
That's interesting, because it's quite a prescriptive process. And was it made clear as a part of the family employment policy that if you didn't get to the end of it successfully, that you may not then have a role in the family business? Or was it always expected that so long as you went through this process, you would end up involved in the business eventually?
That's a good point, actually. I don't think we ever got to that point, as in because the business finished. So we never,
Yeah.
I don't think we actually got to the end of that sort of what would happen if,
I mean,
type thing.
It goes again to the point I made a minute ago about family boards. So you can't avoid disputes, but what you can do is you can take steps to mitigate against them.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that mitigates against a dispute is creating certainty, and that usually involves creating a document that sets out what the rules are.
Yeah, well, that's the family constitution. That would be one of those, is the direction of the business.
Yes.
What's going to happen to the business, rules of sort of how decisions are made. There's also could be a piece in there about dispute resolution, you know. So if there is a conflict between two members of the family, or three, or like, you know, one side versus the other, and or branches, different branches, or even gens, different, you know, you get somebody like in yourself as a mediator to try and resolve it rather than it get worse.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that as well as being a solicitor and a partner here with HCR, I'm also a civil and commercial mediator. So I get appointed by other solicitors to assist them in the resolution of their disputes. It's just, I think my process is probably slightly more formal than yours is.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
As a family mediator. But actually, I mean, this kind of segues in neatly to the dark and dingy world of disputes, and how you manage them. Now, very often, what these kind of disputes manifest as is shareholder disputes. So in effect, because it's usually a minority shareholder says that their rights have been infringed as a result of the conduct of the majority shareholders. And and they therefore say that they're entitled to certain remedies under the Companies Act, usually that their shares are bought out. But they will say that their position as minority shareholder has been unfairly prejudiced as a result of what the majority shareholders have done. Now, the upside to an unfair prejudice petition is that the remedies available to the court is extremely wide. The two downsides, both of them relate to costs. First of all, they're extremely expensive. And second of all, there's a strict prohibition on the company funding the litigation. There's all sorts of authority saying that the litigation must be funded by the individual directors, so it has to come out of their back pockets.
Not the business,
that there are certain limited exemptions to that that does allow the company to fund stuff. But if a dispute escalates in that way, and perhaps just before it comes to someone like me in my solicitor's role, is it a question of you trying to set out to them via a process of reality testing and saying, look, this is what could happen if you do go down this, if you embark upon this route whereby you're going to end up in a dispute and you're going to have to go and see solicitors to help you with it? Do you sort of set out what the risks might, well, not the legal, not the merits risks, but what a dispute might look like and what might that might do to the relationships in the family, for example?
Well, yeah, if there was a dispute within a family that I was working with, then yes, I probably wouldn't, I'll probably seek your guidance, quick call, to find out what the legal ramifications are and stuff. But yeah, the sort of the way I would work would be to have these conversations, individually, do a bit of shuttle mediation, all that sort of stuff, to try and see where they're coming from and what the issues are, and see if it can be resolved without, seeking for each side to seek a lawyer, basically. Yeah, because I mean, the shareholding piece is, like I've mentioned, the Constitution, that could be in the Constitution as well, of what the shareholding, it should be in the Articles of Association about shareholding. So yes, there's obviously if they have a shareholders agreement as well, which is another issue.
Well, again, I mean, I often start presentations to try and demonstrate my skill as a litigator, but I often start by saying, look, actually, you need to address these constitutional issues first.
Yeah.
And a shareholders agreement is something I think is really effective in terms of dealing with what might happen in the event of a dispute. So, for example, what happens on an exit by a shareholder, how the shares are acquired, at what price the shares are acquired, and on what basis. If that's enshrined into a document, in actual fact, there's some authority that says that you can't bring an unfair prejudice petition immediately if there is an exit route provided by a shareholders agreement. It's funny though. It's funny though that you very often, when you approach a particular family business and say, look, you've just set up, your intention is to pass this on to your children in due course. Recommend you have a shareholders agreement. It's going to cost X thousand pounds to draft it. And their first reaction is, well,
why?
We don't exactly. Why do we need that? I'm setting this business up with my brother. I really trust them. It's going to be fine. Do you think that's a naive approach by founders? Do you think they ought to try and get something in? I mean, you might regard a shareholders agreement a bit like car insurance, mightn't you? In that I certainly begrudge paying my car insurance premium until I have an accident and I call on the insurance and the insurance pays out and I don't have to pay out to repair mine and someone else's car. The shareholders agreement operates in much the same way, in that you might begrudge paying the fees up front to deal with the shareholders agreement, but it has its value when you call it.
It's like just in case, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I met this chap. He wanted to understand what I did. And we were chatting about his business, and it's him and his partner, not partner, but another business partner. And I said, have you got a shareholders agreement? And he was like, no, what's that? And I was like, just have a look into it.
Wow, didn't even know what it was.
Well, I think he'd heard of it, but he didn't realise the importance of it. Because I said, well, what happens if you fall out? And it's that old, we're not going to fall out. It's like a husband and wife team. They start up a business and then they suddenly find they actually don't like each other and want to get divorced. And of course, then the business comes into it as well. And you're like, well, it's a difficult one. But I think it's almost like if you want to start a business, and that's one of the main things, isn't it? 16, isn't it? I think, to become a director of a business. I think that's no criminal convictions of loss of business or whatever. 16. I think there's another one where becoming a director of a business, but there's no sort of, you don't have to go and do a course on how to run a business, what you're expected to do. It's just, you can just set it up online. I think it costs 16 quid on Companies House. But if you had because when I became a director of Drayton Manor, I went on with my cousin, the IOD course, a certification in company direction. And it was such an eye-opener of what your legal responsibilities are. And it was, to be fair, it really shook me to my boots that, if it all goes wrong, it's like, yeah, you're in trouble, mate.
Oh yeah. Personal liability for directors.
Yeah.
If they breach their statutory and common law obligations.
Yeah, exactly. And but there's no sort of course that you have to do or anything you have to say. So it should be, it's articles association appear. There's a standard articles associations that just are there if you don't put your own articles in. So it's as far as I'm aware, that's how it works. But articles is done for you almost if you don't want to add to it. And there should be, you have to have liability insurance. Why isn't it you have to have a shareholders agreement, or you should have a shareholders agreement? Because does it seem as a nicety? I don't know. I don't know why they don't do these things. I don't think we had a shareholders agreement in our family.
It's definitely the case that the articles that you get when you buy a company off the shelf at Companies House are extremely vanilla.
Yeah.
They don't have any provisions in them that dictate, for example, the terms on which a shareholder might exit.
Yeah.
But you get that if you either bespoke draft articles or have a shareholders agreement in place that sets out exactly what those circumstances
voting
are.
shares, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Whether or not there's subordination between different shares in terms of the rights to call on dividends and the rights to vote and all that kind of stuff. Because again, if you're going to separate ownership and management, it might be that you reward the management with contractual bonuses, and perhaps the shares only have votes attached to them. Who knows? I mean, it depends upon what you want to try and achieve and what you're aiming for. It depends what the family want to do as well.
Exactly.
But yes, I think what we're driving towards really is that disputes sometimes are inevitable. You can't avoid them, and it's a question then as to how you deal with the dispute when it arises. But actually taking some of these constitutional steps, using colleagues of mine in the corporate team, for example, to set up the constitution properly and have a shareholders agreement in place and have bespoke articles and a family employment policy and all that kind of stuff is probably a sensible first step.
Yeah, I think it is having that structure to the business, but also a structure for the generational transition as well. Because if you said, it's that old sort of, is it an adage? Work on the business, not in the business.
Yeah.
Because the majority of family businesses, they're small to medium businesses. They are running the business. They are working in the business.
Yeah.
They're not thinking sort of big. That's sort of, I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but that legal working on the business, it takes time, and it's going to take you out of actually running the business. So a lot of people don't do it, but it's really good to put a steady base in for that succession as well, because then when the transition happens, whether it's on purpose or by an event like somebody dying, which it does happen, then there's all the stuff is in place.
Yeah.
And and all the members of the generations will know as well, that they'll know you can't do this because of this, and did it. So it's an educational piece, to be fair, that's passed down.
And I think you're right as well that there's an acceptance, isn't there, that family businesses take all sorts of different forms. So you've got sort of at the top end businesses like Drayton Manor, and other businesses that I can think of like JCB, for example, which is still in family ownership. Which are large, complicated corporate organisations, and then you've got the two brothers and their two sons in a lockup in the West Midlands somewhere who are making metal products, and that's a very straightforward, simple business, but it's still a family business, and you're still going to have the same tensions and and issues that you would have in those large corporates as well.
Yeah.
Or those corporate family businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, and if those smaller businesses, it all depends on the alignment of where you're going, what's the business doing, and if you've got ideas that where the founders or the older siblings or older generation don't want to do, then it's that choice. What do you do then? If I see it going this way and they see it staying where it is, it's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult place to be in as well.
I've got hopefully what's an interesting question, although you might be about to tell me it's not interesting at all. But if I act for a corporate in a contractual dispute with another corporate, and I go to mediation, that conversation is a very commercial conversation. It's about risk and it's also about the upside if you settle, and also what can be achieved as a part of the settlement. If I act for siblings, or one sibling in a family business dispute, it's a very different scenario.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that commercial objectives can sometimes be swamped by the emotion that comes out because I'm suing my brother or sister or my mother or my father, and I feel so let down because of the way that this relationship has ultimately developed. And that can be sometimes a barter settlement in the context of a litigated dispute. How do you get around that, do you think? I mean, is there a way to manage that emotion and try and make it less of a thing and perhaps focus on the commercial objectives?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, the way that disputes are settled by obviously using yourself, let's say, you have one client, because you can't have the two clients that are opposing each other.
No.
So then they're going to have a solicitor as well, unless they decide to represent themselves. So you've got basically two family members that are getting heated. Then you've got two lawyers that are sort of not at each other's throats because it's a legal dispute. But then that just fuels the flames, doesn't it? Because you're going to say something to the other lawyer. That lawyer's going to say something to that sibling, and it's going to just fuel the flames of this dispute. But the way I would be, if it was in a family that I was working with, then I would be sort of discussing to them openly about what do they want ultimately, and then mediating between them, whether it's in the same room or not, or over time, and hopefully coming to a compromise. Because I think people want to be heard a lot of the time.
Yeah,
they want their wrongs to be righted. Is that a word? Yeah, righted. Even if it's got nothing to do with the business. Might something that happened 2 decades ago. I remember when you did this. I remember when you did that. You pushed me over. You know what I mean? All these emotions come out.
Yeah. So the dispute becomes less about what's happening in the business, more about the fact that my sister received a much better Christmas present when we were 15 than I did, and I remember that family event that I went to where I was treated appallingly, and it becomes more about some of that. You were the favoured sibling and I wasn't. All that
stuff comes out. I remember this. I had nothing to do with it, but there was a family dispute, and it was the father had died and passed on the business to the second gen son. He was running the business, and the business was doing okay, but the sister didn't work in the business and never worked in the business, but was getting dividends out of the business, and he took disliking to that. But it was okay when his father was there, so it was okay when dad was alive. Now the son is running the business and he's doing a bloody good job and he's working really hard, but the sister now is taking the money out of the business. But it was okay when dad was there, so that now becomes it's a sibling dispute. But you know what I mean? So it's more of an emotional thing rather than actually a business issue. It's why is my sister getting money when I'm doing all the work?
Yeah,
but it was okay when dad was there.
I think. I mean, what I tend to do if I'm either acting as a solicitor or a mediator in a family business dispute, I would try and take the emotion out of the dispute by focusing on the legal merits of the claim. So, are you likely to win or are you likely to lose?
Yeah.
In
Sure,
either,
that solves a lot of things, doesn't
yeah,
it?
exactly. In either scenario, what does a good day in court look like, and what does a bad day in court look like?
Yeah.
And I think then you bring it down to the pure economics, which is if you lose, the financial cost to you will be X
Yeah.
£100,000.
Sobering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, as I alluded to a minute ago in a shareholder dispute, the individual shareholders will be on the hook for those costs.
Yeah.
So I think when people realise that potentially this dispute, much as you hate your sibling, and much as you feel wronged by the way they've dealt with you, actually, if this could ruin you, you're better to
Yeah.
get out at a sensible level now.
Mm.
I mean, I've been involved in family business disputes where some really interesting things have happened at mediation. For example, someone goes in determined to buy the other person's shares, but then the other sibling in the other room has made an offer that they want to buy our shares, and so you end up in a situation where actually for the right price,
Yeah.
it's best to sell and actually concede concede our position that we wanted to buy them out and run the business ourselves. That can be an interesting. And I always say to clients when they're going into really any mediation on a shareholder dispute, but particularly family business ones, look, think about a figure. If you want to sell, great. But also think about what you might do if you want to buy. Think about what happens if the other side reverses the remedy you're looking for. What would you prepared to go for? So
That's interesting. So you got one wanting to buy one out and one wanting to buy the other out.
yeah,
And
then it becomes a discussion about price then.
Yes. And then where does ego come into that as well?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, because they're going to say, well, we want to buy it. We want to buy it because it's our. But actually, then they've got to really think inward and go, do we actually want this?
Yeah.
Do we want to do this? Or
And
do we want to walk away with X?
I've certainly been involved in disputes where, and this is what I was talking about, the sense of entitlement, where you have two parties both offering to buy the other party out.
Yeah.
And it becomes quite a contested discussion because party A believes they're entitled to this business as a matter of right because of what their father or their mother or their grandparents have said to them. And that can be quite an interesting dynamic, particularly if party B doesn't have that same sense of entitlement, because then it just becomes about how you can maximize value as a part of the transaction. So yeah, there's all sorts of really interesting dynamics in these kinds of disputes.
Well, you bring humans into it, and
exactly.
And especially when you in your family, it's because I'm sure when you have corporate clients, it is about what the rules are or whatever, and it's quite black and white, to be fair, to do with the law. And then you get into family, and it's all about emotions. And
so to summarize, then, how can you and I, as advisors, add value? I was going to summarize on behalf of HCR first, and then I'll pass it on to you to talk about how you can add value. I mean, it seems that the thing that we've repeatedly touched on, I think, is getting your constitution right. So getting a non-contentious lawyer to look at shareholders' agreements, the structure of the business, the articles, possibly a family employment policy, possibly a contract between the family members as a constitution as to how they're going to interact with each other. All of those kinds of things are where a lawyer can add real value. And of course, if a dispute arises on the basis that disputes happen, then engaging somebody who's going to deal with the dispute in a sensible and commercially focused way is obviously also really important. But spending that money up front to try and get the constitution as fit for purpose as you possibly can is something that where there's real value to be added.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the sort of with the constitution, would I suggest to a family that I was working with, you need a constitution straight away? Probably wouldn't. But if it came to that, it would have to be a sort of an agreement across everybody.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is when we started to put ours sort of in by just doing the employment part, because there's up to 9, 12. You can add whatever you want into a constitution. business direction. How
Mm.
I've already said, and we just started on that one just to see how that would go, because otherwise, let's say you've got 12 policies in your constitution. That that's going to take time and effort to get them written, which would could be yourself that write it, or HCR could write them, but then it's implementing them.
Yeah.
And that's where I would come in to implement them and see how it's going to work and communicate with them, because all intents and purposes, it could take days just to get one policy done, and whether you have time
No.
to sit for days on one document.
So is that where your value comes in? Your value
Yes.
to these businesses is to come in and effectively act with your learned experience as a family
Yeah.
business operator, and also your training,
Mm.
to come in and act as a mentor and a guide to these businesses to help them
Yes,
to get to where they
mentoring,
need to get to.
coaching, there's all sorts
Yeah.
of things. Yeah. So if let's say a family business said, yes, we want a constitution, we want these documents in that constitution. Great, easy. I'd go to yourselves and say, look, I need these documents. These ones need to be written like this. Da, da, da. They all agree, and then I would take those back, and then we'd go through them literally line by line, and then say, okay, they're not happy with this. We need to change this, because obviously most of it isn't. I say obvious. There's nothing obvious, but it's not legal. It's not legally binding. It's for the family to sign up to it.
Yeah.
To say we are going to abide by this, but it's not legally binding. So yes, this is where I add value. I would sit with them through it and guide them through it, and then work with yourselves to put in the constitution, put in the shareholder agreement, put in, change the articles if needed, if they're just the standard set, and hopefully avoid disputes along the way as well.
So every family business then needs a George.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. On
That'd
that,
be nice.
on that bombshell, then, I'd just like to give the opportunity now to thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today, George. It's been really, really interesting.
Thank you, Peter.
And I hope it's been interesting for you as well. Thank you very much.